This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I'm Sam Alaimo, and I'm joined by Mark McGrath. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's start from the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
Army brat. I was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky, where we allegedly keep the gold. My dad was a West Pointer. Both my parents were born in New York City, and from childhood was moving around constantly. And then in 8th grade, I settled in Pittsburgh. We settled in Pittsburgh with my mom, and my parents divorced. So I went to high school in Pittsburgh. You know, I'd lived in Germany. My father did an unaccompanied tour in Korea, and my grandparents lived right here in Philly, down at 6 on Lombard. So I lived there for about a year and a half with them. Lived in Germany for 3 years, back to Kentucky. And then my father had an assignment in Pittsburgh. And then that's where, when my parents split, that's how I ended up going to 8th grade in high school in Pittsburgh. And then I went away to college and joined the Marines, and that was it. But so I kind of had an interesting eclectic upbringing.
So bouncing around as a kid, I always ask this question, especially with the military guys, because did you get in trouble a lot as a kid? And I usually ask, no?
My brother did, but no, I was the oldest of 3. I felt like my younger brother got in more trouble. Or at least he got away with more things than I did. But when your dad's an Army officer and you rebel, I rebelled by going to the Marine Corps, and I think he was following Fish, the band Fish, as he was going through school. But I did not get into much trouble. It's not that I didn't do things that wouldn't warrant getting in trouble. I guess I had a good way of not getting caught.
So your brother was following Fish around the country, the band.
Yeah.
And you rebelled to go in the Marine Corps.
That was my rebellion, yeah.
What's with the rebellion against your dad? Was he...
The rebellion started for me in 1985 when my aunt, his older sister, married a Navy pilot. And I always loved the ocean. And, being around the Army my whole life, it's like, well, I'm going to be in the Army like my dad. But I really like the sea. And I meet this guy that marries my aunt that, flew planes that landed on ships. I'm like, well, that's kind of like the best of both worlds. And then that next summer, Top Gun came out.
Oh my God.
And I was 10, and that was life altering. And then I kind of wound up just saying, no, I'm going to be a Navy pilot. And my father was like, yeah, whatever. I guess that's acceptable, In high school, I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Pittsburgh. Our disciplinarian was a Marine, and I did get in trouble once. I got in a fist fight, and I beat the crap out of a kid, and I got summoned, and I was waiting in the office, and there's all this Marine paraphernalia around the office, thinking, this guy must have something to do with the Marine Corps. His name is Mr. Wheeler, and he's gone now. But he came into the office. He grabbed me by my tie, started smacking me, threw me up against the wall, fighting, da-da-da. And he kept calling me McDermott, which is not my name, but he kept calling me McDermott. He says, you want to be a bum? And I said, you want to be a bum, McDermott? And I said, no, Mr. Wheeler, I want to be a Marine. And he let go, like he let his talons out of my neck and said, you can go back to class. So I ran around, told everybody, dude, if you're ever in trouble, tell Mr. Wheeler you want to be a Marine. 2 or 3 days later, my mother, I come into the house and she's crying. And she said, there's a message on the machine from a staff sergeant, somebody from the Marine recruiting office, and that you have to go see him. And why are the Marines calling the house? And I'm like, I don't know, just ignore it, until I went to school. And Mr. Wheeler asked me if I saw Staff Sergeant Rowe, was his name. I said, well, no. And he says, if you don't bring me back a business card from this office, you can count on being in detention for the rest of your career here at Central Catholic. So
that's a hardcore school. That's like a story I'd expect from the 50s.
Oh man, it was all boys Catholic school in the early 90s.
Is it still that way?
I don't think so, no. And I think it's watered down. Like when my father went to all boys Catholic high school in the 60s, when I went through in the 90s, it just kind of probably is a diminishing return. But yeah, it was pretty hard. I mean, in my class, let's see, just in my graduating class from high school, I think we had 5 or 6 Marines. I was the only officer, and then there was about 5 guys that either enlisted in the reserves or active duty. In fact, my buddy Mike. So I convinced my buddy Mike to get on the bus with me to go down to the recruiting office. And it was not a good neighborhood. So we go down together, and right away impressed, blown away. And he asked me what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to be a Navy pilot. He goes, Marines are naval. and they're naval aviators and they land on carriers too. And why don't you sit down and watch this movie? And you can find it on YouTube. It's called Warriors from the Sea.
I got to check it out.
10 minutes. And it was literally geared towards me and Mike. So we're sitting there watching this video. I'm like, wow. So wait a minute. You're telling me you can be a naval aviator, you go to sea and all this, but you can be part of this group that's doing all that? I'm like, totally in. And Mike actually just retired a few years ago as a master sergeant. The guy that went with me to the recruiting with this, the video worked.
So he signed up. He enlisted.
He enlisted when we graduated, and then I had a ROTC scholarship. So I went to Marquette University on a naval ROTC scholarship with a Marine option.
You grew up in a military environment. Was Top Gun the moment where you're like, yes, I want to do it?
No, I wanted to be in the military. Top Gun was the moment that I wanted to be.
Your whole life you wanted to be in the military?
Yeah. For as long as I could remember.
And then Top Gun was the moment it turned into water.
I got away from the Army. Yeah, I found my way out.
The sea and the air, I guess. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I always like to joke. I wanted to be an oceanographer, but Catholic high school beat that out of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I wanted to be from day one, like my dad, to go into the military. I remember taking aptitude tests as kids, and I always came back military officer, military officer, military officer. It wasn't even a thing for me. And I wanted to be a pilot until I went to college in Naval RTC, and we had a Marine officer instructor that taught us all about like how to really be a Marine. It's where I first heard about John Boyd was from him. And he got us so fanatic about being Marines, like you didn't care if you were a pilot or not. And then when I found out that my eyes were no longer good for flying to be a pilot, I'm like, well, hell with it. Like, I'm going to be a Marine. So who cares? Like,
your friend group went and enlisted. You decided to go the officer path. You got the scholarship, but what made you pursue the scholarship in the officer path?
Again, when your dad's a West Pointer, I think they sit you down at some point. They say, okay, you can go to the service academies, you can do ROTC or the GI Bill. If you want to go to college, I think those are the three options. So I probably could have gone the West Point prep, but I didn't. I just didn't want to be in the Army at all. Plus, my father was on the staff at the time there. Yeah. The thought of being like
you get extra
Colonel
attention.
McGrath's kid, it wasn't really for me. And I just didn't want to be in the Army at all. Like I absolutely was hell-bent on not being in the Army. I wanted to be in the naval services so bad, particularly the Marines. Like it was huge to me. So I went the ROTC route. And I wanted to go to a Jesuit school too. I went to Marquette, which is run by the Jesuits. So they have a very unique way of teaching and learning and thinking and challenging assumptions. It was kind of like a radical approach that I liked. And having gone to the order that I had in high school was Christian Brothers, and they were very much the disciplinarians. And I always thought that the Marine Corps was a snap compared to graduating from Central Catholic with Christian Brothers. So I felt very prepared. But I remember them telling me, like, his name was Brother Clement, he was our guidance counselor, saying, no, it's Jesuit schools for you. You need to go to a Jesuit school. You ask way too many questions. They're perfect for you. And he was right. I loved it. It was a great time.
So what did you do in the Marine Corps?
I was an artillery officer.
Tell me about that. Like, what was the when you first got in there, what was the training like? How did it kick off?
Yeah, so all Marine officers have to go to OCS, and then when you're commissioned, I graduated. I went. All Marine officers, regardless of where you go to the basic school, which is 6 months. So regardless of what your specialty is going to be, you're going to be basically infantry officer first. And I say infantry officer, like everybody's going to be able to command a rifle platoon, regardless of being a pilot, a lawyer, a logistician, artillery guy, it doesn't matter. Everybody goes through that training first because every Marine's a rifleman. So you had that common experience. And then when you graduate and you find out what your specialty is going to be, for me was artillery. Like the infantry guys stay there and they go through another 10 weeks, I think it is, of your officer course. Our artillery school, 6 months. So I went to report to my unit out in the fleet, which is the 1st Battalion, 12th Marines, was in 3rd Marines in Hawaii. And then you did like 6 weeks of on-the-job training, and then you get sent back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for 6 months of artillery officer basic course. And then from there, I went right to deployment in Okinawa. So out in the fleet, yeah. Rock
and roll. So was artillery your job the whole time you were in the Marine Corps?
For my fleet tour, yeah. And then I was an officer recruiter before I got out. It's called an officer selection officer, and so I did that. And then I went to the civilian world.
So let's dig into 9/11, because I know you were deployed during 9/11. Do you remember like the exact day, the exact moment?
Yeah, we were about to deploy. So September 10th was a night like any other. Everybody went to bed. My platoon sergeant was away, and one of my corporals was acting liaison chief. I was the liaison officer in charge of all the forward observers and everything. And we were doing a stand table exercise with our rifle battalion, which is 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And I said, look, if anything happens or you need anything, just call me and I can help, because you're going to be kind of undermanned or whatever. Most Marines, they never did that though. They always knew what they needed to do. Officers just would have to tell them what to do and they would always get it done, which is one of the great things about being a Marine. But the phone kept ringing. In Hawaii, we were 6 hours off New York time. Like the phone keeps ringing. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, look at the clock. It's like, well, it's too early for him to be calling unless he's like getting everybody up at like 3 a.m. or what the. So I finally get up because my then wife says, get up and go answer the damn phone. Like the cell phones are all going off. And this was like the first cell phones. Like we were just like my first ever cell phone. I answer it and it's my buddy, Matt, who's in my battery. And he goes, I go, what the fuck? And he's like, dude, shut up and turn on the TV right now. The fucking World Trade Center has been attacked. Yeah. I get chills thinking of it. I turn on the TV. And like, holy shit. My first thought was like, do you know how many times I've been on the roof of that observation deck as a kid, when your family's from New York City? But then like all of a sudden you're like, this isn't a dream. Like this is real. It's about to go on. Like everything that we've been training for, it's going to be time to go. And it took us forever to get on base that day. Yeah. Couldn't get on base. We assembled at a house in Kailua, Hawaii, and we watched TV. And I remember calling in and saying, hey, we're stuck out here. They won't let anybody on. Eventually we got back on. And I remember the battalion commander of the rifle battalion telling us, quietly get ready. Quietly get ready. This is it. So yeah, I think everybody wanted to get their hands in it. Yeah. Then we deployed to train and we were, Pakalo training area in Hawaii. It's high altitude. Well, guess what? The mountains of Afghanistan are high altitude.
Pretty high altitude.
Yeah. And they ended up not sending 3rd Marine Division at first. So 1st and 2nd went. We were what's called the speed bump in case the Koreans tried anything, North Koreans tried anything.
Oh, man. You're a guard at 6.
Yeah, that was our mission. So nothing. And then we all had, for guys that were my year group, we had B billets that we had to go to. So some guys went to boot camp, like working the drill field. A lot of guys went to recruiting. I went into recruiting. And then on our B billets, which you guys will call short tours, OIF started and was over pretty quick. And the monitors are like, yeah, you guys should get out and go make money because this thing's over. Who knew?
2004, they thought it was over.
Yeah. Who knew?
I can't even conceive of that, knowing that what came after 2004.
Looking back, I guess you could have thought that would happen, especially a lot of the books that they made us read. I would thought, well, a protracted guerrilla war. That's like that one book they made us read, Street Without Joy by Bernard Fall, Firepower and Limited War. I mean, we were always learning about these things. It was funny because at OBC, at artillery school, they weren't teaching us how to use supporting arms versus insurgents. It was about how to use supporting arms versus, columns of Soviet troops. And that was in 99.
Totally unprepared for the guerrilla war. Totally unprepared.
I say like as Marines, we kind of were because Somalia had happened and then like things like Kosovo. Yeah. And it was always kind of a discussion. And the best part about being in the Marines, one of them is the professional reading program. I mean, a lot of the books that we were meant to read, like you just mentioned, Street Without Joy by Bernard Fall, Mao's book on guerrilla warfare is on the list, Che Guevara. I was always into that. Like I always kind of liked the guerrilla warfare stuff was really fast. I read a lot about guerrilla warfare and take the concepts actually and teach it to companies. Yeah. I find it fascinating. Nice. I always found it fascinating, like how, because it's a very Marine thing too. It's like, how can we do so much more with so much less, and like be put in like the worst conditions and just be laughing about it and like, who cares? This is how it goes. So, but yeah, no, they told us, I'll never forget. It's like, you boys, it's like, no, we can do, he was from the South. Ain't no we can do for y'all. It's like infantry officers, artillery officers, there's far too many of you. And guess what? You don't have a combat fit rep or an expeditionary medal. Everybody behind you going to be lumping over you for years. They're going to be leaping over you. You should get out and go make money. Go take what you learned somewhere else. So we did. I can go out with my best friends. Very few of them stayed in. Most of us Most of us got out.
Okay, so let's wrap up the military. What was it like on the one hand, the best aspect of the military you got?
The Marines. Being a Marine and being with Marines and leading Marines, there's no part of my identity that means more to me than being a Marine.
Do you still have Marines in your life?
We just had a reunion last month in Michigan with our old battery, and we get together with our battery commander who retired as a colonel, and we all love each other like brothers. And, of course, anywhere you go and you see that equal globe and anchor, and, you go up and talk to anybody and it blows people away. Like, wow, you can just go up and talk to somebody. I won a bet one time, $100. We were in Minnesota in a corporate event, and the ESPN baseball crew was there. It was Rick Sutcliffe, Aaron Andrews, and Dusty Baker, who's now back managing again. And this is one of those years that he'd been fired and he's commentating. And I go, I bet you I can get Dusty Baker to buy me a beer. And they're like, no way. Everybody's throwing their money down. Like, watch. So I get up and I walk over and I tap Dusty Baker on the shoulder. And all they see is me walk over, tap Dusty Baker on the shoulder, him up and give me a hug and like sit down and have a drink with me. He's a Marine. The baseball manager. They're like, how did you do that? How did you do that? Like, oh, Dusty's a Marine. And we did talk about baseball once. We talked about the Marine Corps the entire time. Great guy.
The Marines have a gift that they've managed to maintain that camaraderie.
It's like
not just while you're in, but after you're out as well. It's almost more powerful when you get out.
You're mandated, I think. They inculcated you never stop learning, never stop, earning that title. I mean, you're constantly living up to it. Or being challenged to live up to it. And everybody's trying to do the best they can.
What about the worst aspect of the military?
The worst I'm sure we could relate to lots of things. Shitty.
What's the one that stands out that you think you're actually able to fix now with your current philosophical endeavors?
I don't know. I mean, the bureaucracy is so strong in the Defense Department. Like, you think, it'd be great to like be the guy that came up with a solution that just eliminated hurry up and wait.
Oh my God. Can't even imagine.
I think the other thing I loved about the Marines, it's very hierarchical in garrison, like very hierarchical, but in the field and, it's very flat. Like your officers are always with the troops. It wasn't like the officers are way back there and the troops are over here.
Hovering head in a helicopter. I love the philosophy. Everyone's a rifleman. I love it.
Yeah. And even now, like we get together at these reunions, there's very few officers. Yeah. There's very, very few of us. I mean, there's a lot more Marines. So when we get together, it's still kind of that really tight bond.
Even when I was a kid, I was debating on becoming a Marine officer or an enlisted SEAL. Even now, the pull's there. Because even just the marketing aspect alone of the Marines is so powerful. But then to hear everybody talk about it, like their eyes light up talking about the Marine Corps, that's a powerful thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and like we were saying at the beginning, I mean, I think Marines and SEALs, they have a lot more in common than others. I mean, we get the best emblems, right? We both have an eagle with an anchor, and then you get a little bit of difference with the trident. So instead of a trident, we put the globe up. But no, it's all good.
So you got out of the military, bridge the gap between getting out and then having your company now, so we could see how that flows.
So I initially got into medical sales with a startup that was actually owned and operated by some former Marines. Which, by the way, we're not allowed to say that term anymore. Former Marines.
What do you say?
Marines. So if you're alive, you're a Marine. Unless you got kicked out, then you're an expert.
Fucking love it.
Yeah. No, it was General Amos, our commandant, a few commandants ago, came out with an order like, I don't ever want to hear former Marine. Yeah, you're a Marine until you die. So, and then even then, you're either going to be in hell with all your old buddies or up in heaven guarding the streets, according to the song.
I love the logic.
I got out. I did medical sales. I kind of went through a lot of what they call junior military officer recruiting, like where big corporations are looking for shift managers or whatever. And a lot of it seemed boring to me. And medical sales was kind of interesting.
The medical part or the sales part?
Kind of the medical, like, I guess the sales part. Like, it was going out and interacting with people.
So that appealed to you immediately?
Yeah.
Coming out of the military?
Yeah. Well, having been a liaison officer for 2 years and then having been a recruiting officer.
You're kind of selling anyway.
Yeah, you're kind of selling, and you're kind of going back to like reading about guerrilla warfare and stuff. I mean, you are kind of like an embedded advisor, and it's kind of the same thing is, in a medical situation, like you're trying to embed yourself with whatever you're selling. In my case, it was diagnostic pathology. Like you're trying to become part of the team of the dermatology office or the gastroenterology office or whatever. And it was fun, but I got bored with it. And then I went through another recruiter that specialized in, they were just looking for like, say, SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, Marines, pilots. Like they didn't want not gunfighters, right? I mean, they didn't want logisticians or supply officers or whatever. And they had a different recruiting approach. And he goes, you ever heard of like investment wholesaling? And I'm like, no, what's that? Like, well, you work on Wall Street and you got to get licensed and you're basically going to sell investment products to financial institutions. And I'm like, yeah, sign me up. That sounds really fun. Like the dynamics and chaos of Wall Street. And I found that to probably be the best application of what it is they taught me in the Marine Corps.
What year was this?
This was 5.
So this was a few years before one of the worst recessions in American history.
Yeah.
Did that impact your career?
Oh yeah. I mean, we're about to have the 15th reunion this year of the team that I was on through the financial crisis. And we're tighter than, it's funny. It's the only place outside of the Marine Corps where I ever felt as tight with a group than I did with this group of guys this is the 15th consecutive year that we're going to get together next month. And it's going through that together. We had a very interesting leader that wanted to make an external sales team that had 0 financial experience. So 2 of us were veterans. He was looking for like college athletes, like drug reps. Like I hit a few of the wickets and we set records. It was so much fun. But then to go through that immediately, not knowing not having come up in that industry, like I wasn't scared or worried. Like, I used to see these people freaking out and you read about people jumping off skyscrapers and things like that. I'm like, nobody's shooting at us. Like there's, I got friends in Afghanistan that are getting shot at right now or living in a hole. Like I get to put a suit on today and, stay at a Ritz-Carlton. Like, is this really that bad? Like, I just had like a different way of looking at it. And it was in that path of just the chaos of markets that I started going back to the warfighting curriculum in the Marine Corps and pulling out Boyd, getting right back to John Boyd and realizing that I had to go in deep, do like deep questions about what it was that the Marines actually taught me, because it was a lot more than I realized.
So your first exposure to Boyd was the Marine Corps. Let's dive in.
In Naval RTC, yeah. We learned about it in the Evolution of the Art of Warfare class in Naval RTC in college.
So lay it out for anybody who doesn't know what Boyd is and what OODA loop is and what VUCA is. How do you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So John Boyd was a retired Air Force colonel, and which is often what he's just reduced to. He was a fighter pilot and he came up with this 4-step process called OODA loop that helps you make decisions in chaotic nonlinear environments. And that's about it. That's kind of how we all kind of learned it initially, right? Like,
right.
We're in a 1v1 situation and your OODA loop is faster than mine, you win. And my OODA loop's faster than yours, you win. And it's an oversimplification of something that's designed to empower you to thrive in any situation to achieve excellence, either individually or as a team. So Boyd's kind of this radical that as a young lieutenant and junior captain, he writes the definitive air-to-air combat study that's still in use by NATO air forces today in his free time. He comes up with what's also called energy maneuverability theory, which is the trade-offs, the gain and loss of energy, the turn inside the other. It's a mathematical formula, and I'm a historian, and I always botch it in layman's terms, but it's basically how do we gain or lose energy faster than our opponents in certain situations. And it informs like the design of A-10s and F-15s and F-16s and all that stuff F-18s all came from Boyd. He retires from the Air Force and he goes on this just sabbatical, like this permanently self-induced exile, where when he comes out, he publishes this paper called Destruction and Creation. And Destruction and Creation is a combination of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Like you can never with any certainty or accuracy calculate exactly where you are. We can do one or the other, but you can't do both. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is like you can't have complete information, and no system within itself can verify itself within itself. That. And then the last one was entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, that all natural processes, entropy increases, disorder increases.
Where did he seclude himself to do this kind of hermetic study?
Yeah. So, great question. So when he retired, he lived in a small apartment. He was living on his retirement salary only. He turned down, he could have worked for a defense contractor and probably made millions. He was such a genius. He did it all in his apartment. He did it all in libraries, the Pentagon.
He was just obsessed.
Yeah. He believed that he was in pursuit of something, even up to his deathbed. He believed that he was in pursuit of something that was going to improve how we learn, how we operate, how we thrive, and the complexity of our universe. And it's a lot more than the little 4-step tactical process. But his work was so complete and it was so interdisciplinary. I mean, he read thousands of books. I've been to the archive several times in Quantico, and I've seen all his archives are in the Marine Corps. How I heard about him and how the Marines heard about him was after the Vietnam War, and the Marines were doing a lot of soul searching. They start talking about maneuver warfare. And there was this, strange, esoteric retired Air Force colonel that goes around the Pentagon and gives this brief called Patterns of Conflict that's like 6 hours long that nobody wants to go to. And he's got these radical ideas of how you can, through insights and orientation and harmony and all these other ideas, like, how you can thrive in the throes of combat. And the Marines actually take the risk, like, yeah, sure, have them come down to Quantico, let's do it. And he gives them the brief, and that was it. I mean, he was always more affiliated with the Marines from that point on than the Air Force. And it led to a lot of great things in the Marine Corps. One of the big things would have been the book Warfighting, which was then called Fleet Marine Force Manual 1, is now called Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication number 1. But, Warfighting, which they teach at business schools and they read in boardrooms and things like that. And it's basically, how do we cognitively approach warfighting? How do we cognitively approach the chaos of capital markets, the chaos of sports, the chaos of the corporate world, whatever it is?
It's radically different from what most people are taught about OODA loop.
Yeah.
To me, OODA loop is like, all right, I'm on a sniper mission. I'm doing an inflow right now. It's 2:00 in the morning, night vision goggles. I'm looking at my environment and assessing what I would do, observe, orient, decide, act.
Yeah.
And you're talking about what happens years before that.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen years after that, a full encompassing philosophy.
That's what got that sniper to that position anyway.
Yep.
What are the things that he's been trained with that shape how he observes and makes sense of his world, how he comes up with ideas, how he learns, how he thrives and survives? It's so much bigger than just tactical scenarios. Now you could say, like, well, you could have it tactically, operationally, strategically, yeah, but I think that Boyd, and the deeper I dig on this stuff, the more I realize, like, the empowerment that you get from really delving into his ideas, it's beyond anything that even I understood when I was in the Marine Corps, and it's taken years and years and years of study and application in the investment business to really see it. But then, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Absolutely cannot unsee it.
So let's play it out real world. When you were in the investment business, how did you apply it?
So, well, kind of like the picture I was painting, like, why did I see things so differently, right? Like, I hadn't been conditioned to think the way a lot of people in that industry had been, because they came up off the desk, they'd been in it for years, they've been through crises before. Someone like me that's not too far removed out of the Marines and is, I'm happy if I have like a carpeted floor with a poncho liner and like a bag to put my head on, right? That's like my idea of luxury. Going into that world was already, kind of weird. And I just started looking at things differently. Like, my experience there was shaping how I see things. So, like, my biases, my conditioning and all that stuff, it wasn't like a lot of the other people in that space. It was more like, well, this guy's a veteran. He was in the Marines. He just sees things differently. I would say to myself, nobody's shooting at us. I'm going to be driving from, this brokerage house to that brokerage house, and there's probably not going to be any IEDs. There's probably not going to be any, like, checkpoints. There's probably not going to be anybody taking a pot shot at me. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then you read these headlines and you're like, why are people freaking out about these headlines? Like, this is like a great buying opportunity. Like, if you're doing all the right things, but that's orientation. Like, if my orientation is wired that way, I'd see things as an opportunity where somebody else would see it as a total abject crisis.
It's almost like the observe phase of the observe, orient, decide, act isn't just observing literally what's around you. It's observing the full complex environment.
Yeah.
What are people thinking? What are the mass movements at play? What are the geopolitical events? What led to the recession? What's going to get us out of the recession? So you were analyzing it strategically and then able to make the most of it.
And trying to synthesize too. This is the other thing with Boyd, is that analysis is not enough. You have to have synthesis. So trying to break things down analytically and then put things together synthetically that other people can't see, something novel.
Yeah. I would call it disintegration integration.
Sort of. Yeah, because that's really what it's destruction creation. That was his paper. It's breaking things down, pulling it apart, putting it back together in a way it didn't exist before. But I always start talking about orientation. So orientation is really where you got to start. Orientation is you. That's what makes you you. It's your cognition. You see people say it's the brain. No, it's not the brain. It's the mind. The mind and the brain are two different things. It's the mind. It's like, what do you think? What do you feel? Who are you? Where'd you go to school? What'd you grow up with? What kind of family did you come from? What are your cultural traditions, your genetic heritage? How do you handle new information? What do you do with new information? What's your appetite for learning? Are you a reader or not? All those things play into, I also call it your cognitive software. It's like your internal operating system. That's what shapes how you see and make sense in your environment. Yeah. The orientation. So really the starting point is that. The orientation is how I shape and see things that make sense in my world. So that sniper out there, his orientation is what shapes whatever it is he sees. Now he might see something that's a threat, whereas sheriff sniper would say, what are you talking about? It's just whatever, because they have a different cognitive understanding of things, or different experience, or different knowledge, or different learning, or whatever. That's the critical component is orientation. The phase is where people say, well, the phase of this, then goes that, as if it were just a loop. It's not really a loop. And if you look at the OODA loop sketch, and that's how I always define it. I know you read my Substack and you see I always put OODA loop in quotes sketch. That's what Boyd called it. And that's how he drew it. He never drew it in a circular way. He would talk about it that way. So in his early briefings, when he got out of the Air Force and he's talking about patterns of conflict, he was talking about OODA loops, how Alexander had a faster OODA loop than Darius in the Battle of Gaugamela, the Macedonians versus the Persians or whatever. And that's not wrong per se, but his own thinking evolved to say that there's something more than just going through something fast. I have to be oriented a certain way. I have to have certain beliefs. I have to have certain understanding, because that's what actually empowered Alexander to see the opportunity. Not that he was just quick, because you can have a really fast OODA loop, and if you're going in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter. It's just like a dog chasing its tail.
You like, when you talk about these questions you're asking during that observe phase or the orientation phase, that's like injecting caffeine into my veins. Like that's what it does to my body and my mind. And I imagine that's part of the power is knowing what questions to ask, and then endlessly asking those questions to make sure you have relevant, up-to-date information on who you are, what you are, and where you are, and what environment you're operating in.
Because it's always changing.
That's like crack.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand the concept without thinking of it as a loop. So if you can, try to concretize it. Like when you're in the investment firm or a company you're working on now, how do you not see it as a loop? Can you walk me through what it looks like in concrete application?
Ultimately, what you're doing is you're looking for mismatches. You're looking for patterns of things that don't add up. Something's off. Something's wrong. I got bad news, right? Most leaders in business, they're constantly looking for good news. They just want good news. If you're doing OODA loop right, you're doing Boyd right, and OODA loop sketch right, you're scanning your environment for mismatches. Those mismatches are your opportunities. What sport did you play?
I didn't play sports.
No? What sport do you like to watch?
Tennis.
Tennis, okay. Someone's dominant lefty, right? Or dominant righty or whatever, and you can identify a weakness. That's a mismatch, right? Now you as the opponent, you're going to play to that mismatch and seize that advantage, and then or do something novel yourself such that your opponent on the tennis court has no idea what's happening to me. Like you ever see like a sports team, actually Notre Dame the other week when they lost to Northern Illinois, right? They're all standing there like, what just happened? They have no idea what just happened to them, because whatever Northern Illinois was doing, Notre Dame had no answer for. They couldn't identify the mismatch. Northern Illinois kept presenting mismatches to Notre Dame that they didn't know how to handle. Now, why could that have been? I don't know. I would speculate and say, well, we're ranked number 5. We're Notre Dame. We're better than them. That's an unranked team or whatever. We didn't see them as a threat. We didn't see it as a legitimate threat. Whereas Northern Illinois found some gaps. They found those mismatches and they capitalized on those. And the other team had no answer for that.
So break it down for a knuckle dragger brain like mine. If I'm the coach of Notre Dame, what should my mind have been doing in that moment?
Empowering people to make decisions at the lowest level, to look for things that are not apparent to somebody coaching and coordinating from the booth or coaching from the coaching from the sideline, give them the ability to make a different decision. If the play calls for the 2-hole and the 4-hole's open, the 2-hole's not, then go down the 4-hole. Like give people the flexibility and the agility to do certain things. As an example, that could be one thing. You ever read When Pride Still Mattered, the biography of Vince Lombardi? So he went to Jesuit schools. He went to Fordham, and the Jesuits empower you to think and challenge things and question things. And if something, he would tell his players, like, if something works better, then do that. Even if the play called for this and that's blocked and it's open and you're going to score, then by all means, do the one that's open and you're going to score. Don't sit there and say, oh, I'm afraid of coach, or I'm afraid of like violating the rules or whatever. You don't want to do that, because you want to have empowered people to be able to make those kind of decisions.
So by the time you're the coach on the court and you notice this is fucked up, like there's a mismatch, you should have identified that 3 years before.
Possibly.
So just like the Marine Corps did, everyone's a rifleman, so that anyone could plug a gap immediately to win the fight.
Yeah.
So everyone else should be looking at their profession in the same way.
Yeah. So just let's stay on football and Lombardi. So Lombardi used to teach this thing about the sweep. He had this class or school for coaches, and John Madden went to it as a young coach. And he's like, I can't do the John Madden impression, but he's like, we're sitting there for 8 hours just talking about the same play. And what he thought was crazy, like when we go through the same play over and over again for 8 hours, all of a sudden these things emerge that we had never seen before. Opportunities start to emerge. We start to look at things differently, even though we're doing the same heuristic. I mean, you're no stranger to immediate action drills. How many times have you gone through immediate action drills over and over and over again to the point where you're just like, I want to throw up. I'm so freaking bored of doing these things. But then when the moment comes or the chaos comes, or then you apply that, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to stop and think about it. That's part of the orientation. That orientation allows you to shape and see something immediately or act immediately, that you can figure something out before your opponent does or before your enemy does.
How do you think about the difference? That's a good example. So like immediate action drill. So if I am training for a high intensity kinetic conflict and I've done a center peel 10,000 times, leading up to that moment, I'm just acting on instinct. Mm-hmm. I'll just do the center peel. When the little ravine happens in Afghanistan, I'm getting fired at from the north. But that's very different from the coach. It's very different from, like, let's say an officer who's set back, who's making not just an instinctual decision for physical movement, but an actual tactical decision. There's almost 2 different OODA loops you have to abide by, depending on what your position is. Mm-hmm. Have you ever broken it down that way?
Yeah, you need to have trust, right? So you're talking about like how would a team do it with leadership?
Yeah, the guy who's carrying the ball is a very different OODA loop from the coach.
Correct. So where their orientation intersects is that we're the same team. Like every orientation is unique. Your orientation and my orientation. But if we're on the same SEAL team, we're on the same Marine artillery battery or the same football team, at some point we intersect. That we're able to build mutual trust, and from that mutual trust we're able to develop intuition, and we share the same common goal, and everything that we do is geared towards achieving that goal. And we could go through EFAS. That's another Boyd thing. If I'm your coach, if I've done it right, you should be empowered to make the on-the-spot decision, because you have full awareness of what the overall team goal is. And I shouldn't have to tell you to do something. If you see an opportunity, you see a mismatch, you identified a mismatch, and there's an opportunity, I shouldn't have to tell you to do it. You should be able to brief me afterwards of what you did, but you shouldn't have to be told what to do, because what that does is elongates the time scale, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I have to go back and ask Dad if I'm allowed to do something, and he's got to ask Grandpa, and and like that whole chain, by the time something happens, it's over. This is like back to the corporate days. People are not empowered to do things, and by the time they ask all the right people whatever they were asking about, it's already done. Like it's over. Like the time is so far removed. And if a wily competitor had noticed that mismatch, they've already taken advantage of that. There's nothing you can do about it.
So your team of former combatants and athletes, were you guys empowered to operate that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. Decisions that's why we still get together so much. I mean, because we trusted each other literally with our lives, and you were empowered to the lowest man to do the right thing. Everybody knew what had to be done. And it's so much easier to brief me about what you did rather than to ask me if you're allowed to do what you need to do that expands the time scale. We don't want that, because ultimately orientation, we're trying to constantly reorient. My subset's called the world of reorientation. Like, we're constantly trying to build and augment our orientation such that we can compress those timescales. So I can observe something and I know exactly what's happening and I know right what to do without having to think about it. I can act like, if a fly lands on my face, I don't have to think about it. We can just do these things. Like, when pilots eject out of a fighter, ask them, hey, do you remember what you did when you sat there and then you squeezed your cheeks and squeeze your legs and then pull your head up and did, going through your ditty? No, he just did it. Do you remember it? Nope. Well, why don't you remember that? Because you had drilled and trained for that so many times that when the moment of truth came, it was instinctual and you didn't have to do anything except it. You just did it. And then.
So you're doing this now as a company. This is your work. You're helping companies do this. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of, like, let's say the investment firm you were working for, they'd never heard of this before. You come in there and say, listen, I know these guys are playing with a significant amount of money, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. I need you to trust them. I need you to let them make autonomous decisions on the ground, boots on the ground, without your approval, and just wait for them to brief you after the fact. How do you convince people to accept that kind of autonomous action without them having come from it, like without even understanding it?
It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to observe in, say, big public corporations. Is probably not nearly as, I think, of like the bureaucracy, the risk aversion, the lack of trust. They're all command and control systems. Boyd talked about one of his briefs, or organic design for command and control, the difference between leadership and appreciation, or appreciation and leadership, versus command and control. Command and control is a system where we don't trust anybody. So we have command and control, and there's wickets, and there's this, and there's that, and I have to hit, and I have to be able to see everything in real time, and everything's objective. Whereas appreciation and leadership is that I can understand the value or worth of people, ideas, and things. And with that leadership, I can inspire and influence others to achieve uncommon goals together enthusiastically. That's a totally different thing than command and control. That's a trust system.
Yeah.
Boyd talked about in military units about trust, about trusting each other. And, it's no stranger to you. You've been in these types of units where you trust each other literally with your life, even in training. Cause you trust the parachute's going to open. I trust that this round is going to do what it says it's going to do. Like there's all this implicit trust. And when you don't have that, you can't operate. And he figured this out. One of the areas that he studied, and you've seen the sort of epistemology of Boyd, was the Germans after Napoleon. Around when Clausewitz came out, Clausewitz was one of the military reformers after Napoleon, and they're like, we can't have this again. We got to figure out what needs to change. And an acronym that he used to use was EFAS, and it was Einheit, Fingerspitzengefühl, Auftrag, and Schwerpunkt. And Einheit was mutual trust. That if we don't have mutual trust, there's literally nothing we can do as an organization.
Is Boyd or Clausewitz?
This is Boyd. Well, this is the Germans. This is Boyd piecing together what he learned from Moltke and Clausewitz, the rest of them. The second one was Fingerspitzengefühl. Because we trust each other, because we know how to operate and we know our immediate action drills and stuff like that, we can develop intuition so that now we can communicate without even communicating. Right? We develop a team intuition. Auftrag or Auftragstaktik was sometimes it's translated as mission command, but really what it is empowerment. It's that if you know the mission, you know what has to get done, you know the final result desired, you're empowered to do it. You don't have to be told by an officer, and you don't have to be given a book and, this is the paint by number, step by step by step by step. You don't have to have that because you're empowered to do that. You don't have to ask because you know you're allowed to do that. That's the mission. So just do it, right? Everybody's empowered. And the last thing is Schwerpunkt, was focus and direction. What's the focus and direction point? What are we trying to achieve? Either, tactically, operationally, strategically, doesn't matter. And once we all understand that and we harmonize around that, there was another Boyd word, was harmonize, not synchronize.
I dig it.
Synchronize is for watches. Harmonize is for people. Once we harmonize around those goals and objectives, now we're truly empowered to thrive.
You talk about mismatch. It doesn't pair with isolation.
Yeah.
How does that match up go?
So great point. So in his brief, The Strategic Game of question mark and question mark, which he reveals what the question marks are in the brief, It's interaction over isolation. It's the strategic game of interaction and isolation. You interact with your environment, you interact with your teammates, you interact with your subordinates, you interact with your superiors, you interact with your customers, your clients, whatever. You interact with the people you're defending, the people that you're protecting. You isolate your opponents. You isolate your enemy. You're constantly trying to isolate your enemy to reduce his optionality, to limit his action, such that yours can remain free and independent. The reason that you interact is for the goal of free and independent action, so that you individually, or you as a team, you as an organization, can enjoy freedom of action and independent action within your discipline or domain. If you're isolated and I'm no longer interacting, or I could self-isolate. I could say, we know everything. I've done this a million times. We've always done it this way. I can isolate myself that way. My functionality through OODA loop sketch is going to degrade because my orientation and perception is going to be misaligned with reality. And it's going to, if I'm in a competitive situation, it's constantly going to go like that. Crashing an OODA loop. You've heard the term crashed OODA loop, right?
I have not.
Yeah, so that was one of the terms people use a lot. Well, he crashed his OODA loop. Well, what I meant is that I can no longer function independently and freely. Notre Dame's OODA loop crashed. They lost to Northern Illinois. You've isolated your thinking. You've cut yourself off from the rest of the world. This is how it's always been. We know how it's going to be. We don't have to interact. We don't have to get feedback, because that's the other thing with the OODA loop. You're constantly getting feedback. You're constantly getting feedback, making new observations and learning. You heard me use the example cognitive software. I mean, it's just like your iOS and your phone. If you don't update it, you don't refine it, revise it, it just becomes obsolete. It becomes dysfunctional. The human computer is no different. The human cognitive software is no different. You constantly have to keep feeding it, because the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity of the universe is never going away. And I want to surf that rather than be consumed by it. So in order to surf that, I constantly have to keep breaking my models and revising my models and my understanding of how that VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, how that actually flows. So I can create a state of flow.
Is there a certain cycle of the mismatch isolation duality? Like, is it constantly asking for mismatches to then isolate? Is that how that function should work inside the mind?
It can, yeah. I might want to interact with a mismatch. It might not be an isolation thing. It might be an interaction. There's an opportunity for us to interact. If I notice that, say, like a mismatch, I know that certain customers in a certain area aren't being serviced, or they're not getting this, or not getting, that's a mismatch. And that calls for me to interact with them. And then I can isolate my competitors that are not doing the interaction and isolate. I was telling you how I speak Spanish, and I was going into the Bronx in certain neighborhoods where you had to speak Spanish or you'd be in a lot of trouble. Well, in medical sales, a guy is like 6'3", that's wearing a suit with short hair, because I was still in the reserves. I look like a cop. And people would just it was like Moses parting the Red Sea. Like, people would just move away from me. I'd walk into these offices and they'd say, like, "We don't speak English," and I'd start speaking to them in Spanish. And I saw the mismatch. People were afraid to go into these doctors' offices because where they were located. I wasn't. So rather than I isolated mismatch, now I started interacting. And I boxed out all my competitors. It was a pathology lab. They were sending their biopsies to our pathology lab because I would interact. Where then, like, any competitor wouldn't go in there anyway, because they chose to isolate away from that. They chose not to interact with that mismatch. Because I'll never forget this. I remember looking at these reports. I'm like, look at all this opportunity. Like, what is this? Oh, nobody goes in there, man. No, don't go in there.
I see why you call your platform the whirl of reorientation, because this is a never-ending process.
Never-ending process, yeah.
And it's constant awareness. It keeps, like, the word that hits my head is crack. Like, it's got to be addicting once you habituate this kind of process. You're constantly on and constantly aware. And I bet then it feels uncomfortable being isolated. It's uncomfortable thinking you have it figured out at that point.
Yeah, totally. Because you know right then, I got to break my model. Something's off.
Yeah.
I got to break and revise. Most people don't want to do that.
Well, it's uncomfortable at first. And then it's always uncomfortable to do the inverse once it's habituated.
Yeah.
Once you're comfortable, like, literally just opening your brain and understanding the world around you, it has to hurt doing the opposite.
Comfort is exactly doing the opposite. Thinking contrarily, going against a crowd is not a comfortable place to be. once you feel comfort, that's the biggest red flag to you. Like, I got to break the model and redo something, because if I'm comfortable, that's only going to lead to complacency. It's the same thing. It's the same thing in business. Blockbuster was number one in everything, every category in home entertainment, right? Blockbuster was number one until all of a sudden they weren't. And it was just like that, they're no longer irrelevant. But imagine going in there, because like they could have bought Netflix. Imagine going in there and presenting to them, and you're thinking, I got all these stock options. I got a house on Long Island. Like, what do I need to take this risk for? I'm comfy. I don't need to do that. Like, Kodak's another great story. Like, you read about, can't think of the author's name, but it's $1 Billion Lessons was the book. And they go in there, they discovered digital photography. Like, this is going to be the end of us if we don't do something about it. And they're like, we've been in the film business forever. We know what we're doing. Look at the mansion I live in. I'm not taking any risk. I'm not going to lose that. You do have to have some level of, being able to take risks. I always like to tell the story of Apple. Like, I think that Steve Jobs, when they threw him out the first time, it's because he was that guy that's all smashing the model. We got to keep going. We got to keep making this better. And they're like, no, man, we've got money now. Like, we can slow down.
That's right. That's right.
That's why, and they got rid of him. And then they brought him back because they realized that, like, to be competitive, you have to have that approach where you're constantly reinventing yourself. You're constantly reorienting. The world of reorientation actually comes from the same paragraph of a briefing called Conceptual Spiral that the name of our podcast comes from. There's no way out. And what Boyd was saying is that there's no way out of the world of reorientation, because volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and none of that stuff's going away. So there's no way out of that. And if you don't reorient, if you're not in that world of reorientation, you're gonna get defeated. You're gonna become obsolete. You're gonna become irrelevant. And you can overlay that. You can watch any sport. You can look at any business thing. You can start to overlay that. And like I'm saying, it's like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And it's really easy not easy. It's simpler. It's more simple to predict when something's going to derail or something's going to be successful, because you start to look for those traits. That's what I was trying to teach people in asset management. I'm like, once you get this, everything is just going to, whoa, I never knew that was right there before. Or I never knew that was like, all this stuff comes self-evident. A lot of people take, like, when you talk about Boyd, a lot of people will feel intimidated or threatened that you're going in there to tell them that they don't know how to do X. So, like, if I'm working with a football coach, which I have, I'm not telling him, I know more about football than you, and this is how you should coach football. I'm not saying that. I'm showing you that if you take your current model of what you think you know about football and you start challenging that and testing that and smashing that every week in, week out, looking for mismatches within your environment and empowering your people to make decisions within that framework, you're only going to get better as a football coach. You're only going to get better as a football team. One of the best books on this is Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. Yeah. He was the famous San Francisco 49ers coach and coach at Stanford. And knowing zero about John Boyd, he wrote one of the best books ever about, like, John Boyd type thinking. Because I think successful people, it's inherent to them. Yeah. They're inherently doing this. Our argument is that and I think this was Boyd's too, when you become aware of what's actually making you successful, now you can double, triple, quadruple that. That's where the results become geometric.
There's a point I want to hit, because you did a post the other day that it really struck my brain. You were talking about how Boyd is not commonly accepted.
Yeah.
No matter how much he read, no matter how much he studied, no matter how much education, no matter how sound the theory, he was never going to be truly accepted because he had a military background.
Yeah.
He had a knuckle dragger, boots on the ground, pilot
Just
background.
a fighter pilot, yeah.
He was a fighter pilot, but in Korea and Vietnam, if I understand, he was actually a combat fighter pilot.
He flew combat missions in Korea, but never fired a shot in anger, and was never, to my knowledge, was never shot at. And he was not a lead. So he was a cover man in their formation. He was not a fighter ace that developed a tactical model in Vietnam.
But he was a combat fighter ready to incur that risk in a combat.
Oh, absolutely. In his Vietnam time, he commanded what was dubbed as Spook Base. It was in Thailand, and it was where they were running the sensors and stuff, the black ops out of in Thailand. But he never commanded a fighter squad.
Well, I guess the point is that that's held against him.
Yeah.
When that is in fact the primary asset. That's what backed up all of his education and made it worthwhile and made it applicable to asset management, to sports, to
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, to finance.
Yeah.
And it's ironic that those, like the quote unquote experts in theory, would discredit him for what makes his theory actually applicable in the real world.
Right.
It stunned me that that's actually a thing.
So what he did was, as it related to his Korea experience, that came after his real corpus of work started, in theory, the late 60s, when he came out with an energy maneuverability theory. And if you read the Boyd bio, it was when he commanded the base in Thailand that he was writing to his wife, like, I'm on to something. Like, I can see it clear as day. There's this thing I can see. It's going to make humans better off than they are. Like, he was thinking these things. He went back and he revisited his time as a fighter pilot in Korea in the mid 70s. So he had started this work. He went back and revisited the air situation in Korea because it was a 12-1. Like, it was us 12-1 over the MiGs. And he went back and he explored that as part of what was called the lightweight fighter program, which the results of that were the F-16 and the F-18. The myth of Boyd is that, he was a fighter pilot in Korea and he came up with this tactical model in a dogfight, whoever has a faster OODA loop. And that's mostly what it's reduced to.
As if that would be irrelevant.
As if it would be irrelevant. And then I think the other things come, well, he wasn't an academic and he wasn't a PhD.
As if that would be helpful.
As if that, yeah, exactly. And that was really, so when he came up with destruction and creation, that's usually my litmus test. When they say they know a lot about Boyd or OODA, I say, what do you think of destruction and creation and how it applies? Like, what's destruction and creation? The paper that Boyd wrote, it's the only paper he ever published. Just one paper. It's 11 pages, one paper. There's like 50 sources on it. Did you read it? No, I'm not aware of that. Then you can't talk about Boyd.
Yeah.
Because OODA, everything comes from that paper. That's what he riffed off of his entire career, was destruction and creation. It's not very big. I can have a copy of it. Just of course,
I saw it in your book.
It just so happens I have a copy of it in one of my Boyd books. But one of the things that got him on this was like, how in the hell did me as a fighter pilot with 5 children, one of them has special needs, and all the other stuff that I have to do as an Air Force officer, how in my free time did I come up with, the aerial attack study or energy maneuverability theory? Because he did all that autodidactically in his free time. So think about that. You're a young officer, and autodidactically, in spite of all the things that you have to do, for your billet in the Air Force, your 5 kids, one of has special needs, somehow you managed to write in your free time the definitive air-to-air combat study that all NATO Air Forces use and the design theory that is applied to all modern aircraft. That was really his thing. It's like, how the hell did I come up with this? And not all these aeronautical engineers that we have, not all these astrophysicists from, Caltech or MIT or whatever. How is it that I came up with this stuff? And that was really his driving kind of impetus. Like, what is it that empowered me to do that? And that's how he came up with destruction and creation. And that's what he riffed off for the next. He wrote that he published that in 76 and he died in 97. So for the next 21 years, he was basically riffing off that.
It's incredible. Let's move on to sort of a lightning round to wrap this thing up.
Sure.
So random, like radical pivot here. Give me a 60-second pitch on psychedelics. Any direction you want to take it.
So our interest in psychedelics, and if you go to our podcast, No Way Out, we've had a lot of guests lately talking about psychedelics. We've had Jesse Gould. We've had Norman Ohler now twice on our show. Wrote the book called Tripped, which is crazy. Maria Volkova, and we have some others in that we haven't published yet. But we're a veteran-owned, service-disabled small business. And
the podcast or your company?
Our company. So the 4 of us all have.
What's your company called?
AGLX, Alpha Golf Lima X-Ray, AGLX.com. So we all have service-connected issues, but we're a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. And the thing that drives all of us crazy, and I know that you share this, is how many vets are committing suicide.
It's asinine.
It's outrageous. And there are novel therapies that aren't even really novel. These things have been around for thousands of years, like psilocybin and like ibogaine and like MDMA and ketamine and all these other LSD and other things that can improve mental health. We had Norman Ohler on the show, and he's talking about how LSD was actually created for mental health. And it's like a one-time use. It's designed to be like a one-time use product. Like, you use it once and like you never have to You never have to use it again. And he talks about that on the show. But I think that's a really big thing to us is like, what are some ways that we could help veterans get treatment? So we certainly use our platform as a dialogue to get people to think and talk about these things. And turns out, I mean, there's a lot more people talking about them than you would think, which is good. And then, hopefully within the military, it seems that the conversation of psychedelics is a lot less taboo, but they have a stigma, right? They have a stigma that that's what hippies did in the old days, or that's what people that burn their draft cards.
That's going away real quick. That stigma is going away real quick.
Yeah. And I think that any veteran that, we all have compassion for other veterans and we see what people have gone through and, we've all seen it to some level. Something could help them. Do it. And something that's been around for thousands of years and they only maybe need to use it once or whatever. Like, why wouldn't we explore those things rather than, I won't go into the details. I know someone jumped off the Bay Bridge in Rhode Island and when they autopsied him, he had all the quote unquote drugs to help him with, depression and whatever, like all the psychoactive and psychotropic pharmaceuticals. And you wonder, like, boy, if he had gone on a trip, would that have helped him? Would that have cleared out, the things in his head that were, distracting him and keeping him disconnected from reality? And it's Boyd's OODA loop sketch. Like you're trying to get orientations realigned to reality. And I think that psychedelics actually help with that. Yeah.
Second one is, where'd Moose come from?
So in 8th grade, my best friend, Joe Wozniak, started calling me Moose and it stuck. And, with the name McGrath, like Mark McGrath, it's like an alliterative. Moose McGrath wasn't that big of a deal. And then in the Marine Corps, everybody it didn't really pick up in college, oddly enough. Like nobody really called me Moose in college, but in the Marine Corps, like day one, like,
how did
that Moose?
How did they find out? Like, what is you don't look like a
6'3", like, I don't know. Like, a lot of officers aren't tall. Like, I was usually not always the tallest guy, but I was the tallest officer in my battery. So I don't know. They tried to do Sugar Ray. People would try because the lead singer
is so much better.
Yeah, well, the leader of Sugar Ray is Mark McGrath, right? So Mark McGrath, and that would last about a day because somebody would say, "Sugar, you mean Moose over there?"
It's too flattering as well. The nickname has to not be flattering.
Yeah, it's no fun. Yeah. You don't want to be. Yeah, you don't want to be a celebrity. You have a celebrity nickname. Yeah.
How do you prime yourself for the day? 1, 2, 3 things you have. Is there a ritual in the morning?
4:15 wake up.
Jesus.
I don't know why I can't stop it either. Like it's just like you can't not do it.
What time do you go to bed?
10.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So 4:15 wake up. Is that when you hit the pool?
Pool opens at 5.
What are you doing between then?
Reading. I try to read. So Daily Stoic. I do the Daily Stoic. I like that with Ryan Holiday. Very good book. And it's easy because you flip to the thing. I also like to read in the mornings. I read and I listen to 2 types of books. One is Stephen Pressfield's nonfiction books. So The War of Art, Turning Pro, The Authentic Swing. You can read them in 2 hours. And when you listen to them at 2 times speed, you can get it all in an hour. And sometimes going to the pool or whatever, just to have that on. Another one I love is Endurance, like about the Shackleton expedition by Alfred Lansing.
I still haven't read that. I got to buy it.
Yeah, you don't complain about cold after you read that book. And, spoiler alert, it's a historical thing, but everybody survived. And you just can't imagine that people survived that thing. And then when you get to the pool, it doesn't matter how many times you go in, it's like surf torture, right? And
yeah.
It's going to be cold.
Yeah.
It's going to suck for a time, and then it's not going to suck anymore.
Especially when it's cold in Manhattan and you're going into the gym and it's cold and the water's cold and the last thing you want to do is jump in.
No. So my daughter's a swimmer in college. She's a Division I swimmer. And she was asked by an 11-year-old, is it hard to get into the pool? Like, she goes, I've been swimming since I was, half your age. And every time I get into the pool, you got to go through that. I know it's going to be cold. I know it's going to suck. And you just do it.
What's your swim routine like? What's your workout?
Swim, just endurance. Just go.
Just get it.
Just get it done. When I'm primed, I could generally do about 3,200 meters in an hour.
How many days a week do you do this?
5.
5 days a week. You just swim for an hour straight.
The ideal, yeah.
Do you lift at all?
Yeah, I like to do barbells. I like to do the starting strength program. If you're familiar with
sets of 5, right?
Starting strength is like squat, deadlift, standing overhead press, bench, and a power cleans. And I find that my son did that as well. Both of my boys did that. And one of my boys is a senior in high school, and he's a D1 swim prospect as well. I like the simplicity of starting strength. There's actually an article on starting strength on their webpage about the OODA loop. And it's one of those things that I wish I would have known when I was younger. Like I wish I would have known about starting strength when I was in high school or even in the Marines. I think a lot of the PT that we did, you're physically paying for it now.
Yep.
And I think with some refinement, like a barbell program that promotes like more like cell autophagy and things like that, I think would have been beneficial. The other thing too, like, who knew back in like 98, no one talking about like nutrition.
Yep.
Nobody was talking none of that stuff.
It really the war on terror that like there became a cult of fitness. That's when like functional fitness and CrossFit, that's when these things started to blow up.
Yeah. Yeah, we were fit. It was just different. It was just like,
just go run
and like, quit bitching, just go out and run. And yeah, but you should only run something. That's all BS. Like who told you that,
What about after the swim? Anything else after that, or is that the morning?
You got to have the protein. You got to replenish. I do like to fast though. So sometimes like I'll swim and I'll let it keep burning until like noon.
Nice.
So, and just have, like I've been drinking, like the black coffee.
Yeah.
Which is also something I learned late in life. I wish I would have known more about fasting back in the day. But we had like de facto fasting, right? I mean, we'd been on ops and like they don't, you don't eat. Like you don't eat. So you just tell yourself, I don't need food.
It's the ancient things. It's the fasting, the psychedelics, the OODA loop.
Yeah, right?
It's all the old ways. What about books? Do you have a couple books that have changed your life?
The Art of Contrary Thinking by Humphrey B. Neal. It was recommended to me by a cabbie in 2000 when I was home visiting before deployment. And a guy asked me, like, what do you want to do when you get out of the Marines? I said, I want to go to law school, but I was a history major and I don't want to work in a museum or be a teacher. And he says, you should go work on Wall Street. Wall Street's run by liberal arts people. I'm like, BS. He's like, no, man, you got to get the book, The Art of Contrary Thinking. So I got this book, and that's actually the second version. The first one I had was so tattered and marked up. It was actually the first ever thing I bought on Amazon. And it's a famous old Wall Street tome. And it basically says that when you think like everyone else, you're likely to be wrong. And when everybody thinks alike, everyone's likely to be wrong. And you have to train your mind to think against the crowd and think against the herd. And for, Marines and SEALs, it's like, you're going to read this and be like, yeah, that's the life I chose. And like, now I understand it better about avoiding crowdthink. Yeah, I mentioned Endurance by Alfred Lansing. Yeah. I love that book. Oh, and then, Science, Strategy, and War, the Boyd book I was showing you. I mean, I take it with me literally everywhere.
How do you pronounce the author's name again?
Osinga. Yeah.
Franz Osinga,
yeah.
Science, Strategy, and War.
Yeah, he's a retired Air Force officer from the Dutch Air Force. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, this is like, if I was going to say, get the Boyd textbook. Yeah. And it's this, and we're going to riff off of this. I've had it since the first publishing.
It looks like it's been read about 79 times.
Yeah, thousands. And it literally, like I said, it goes with me and everywhere. So Certain to Win by Chet Richards is another great one. And Chet was a collaborator of Boyd, and he's been a guest on our show. His book, Certain to Win, is like how to apply Boyd specifically to business. It's got more of a maneuver warfare type flavor to it, whereas, say, that book is more of the comprehensive, like, thriving in complexity. And that's the one that I would recommend. You can't come in and teach a class on OODA and then leave and like everybody knows it. His minimum that he would request was 6 hours.
Oh,
I need 6 hours with you to talk about these things. People say, well, you got 15 minutes. I'm like, all right, I'm going to distill a 6 to 36 hour brief in 15 minutes, and I'll do my best. And hopefully you give people enough of a taste. And if they don't get it, then their competitors might. And if their competitors do, the people that wouldn't give it the time of day, they're in a lot of trouble.
I love it.
Yeah. And that's ultimately, we say it all the time. And you see me write this on the Substack. Do this before your competitors do. If your competitors are learning these things and you're not, you're going to get hosed. It's imminent. You can look at it as an overlay and slap it on and say they are going to lose at some point because they're unable to reorient. They're unable to constantly change their environment. They're too comfortable. They're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to threats. And what we try to do is try to build an internal component in an organization so that they can see these things themselves. And they don't need to rely on us as a crutch. We can kind of come in like an embedded liaison and then leave.
Yeah.
We don't want to be like a big box consulting that you just keep, constantly buying, boilerplates and templates from. But yeah, that's what you ultimately you teach people, and they have to do the work. Like if they don't do the work, and their competitors are, it's going to be an ugly situation for them at some point.
How about movies?
Big Lebowski, number one. Right. Yeah, and I walked in here to the lobby and I saw the mirror that I have that exact mirror in my office. Are you a Lebowski achiever? Of course, Full Metal Jacket.
Oh yeah,
goes without saying. Yeah. After the Big Lebowski, and then like number 3 is harder to pin down. I mean, of course, Top Gun was very influential on me.
Classic.
My father raised me on John Wayne movies, both the military.
Never actually seen one. I have to say.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sans Iwo Jima, Green Berets, all those, and even like the Westerns. I watch a lot of movies with my boys. So one boy's 19, the other's 18. So, Big Lebowski, Animal House, those sorts of things.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. How can people follow you and your work and your company?
Yeah, so to go, our website is aglx.com, Alpha Golf Lima X-ray.com. The Substack is The Whirl of Reorientation, but I just changed the domain. So if you type in thewhirl.substack.com, WHIRL, it goes right to it. And then our podcast is No Way Out, and you can access the podcast either from aglx.com or The Whirl and The Whirl of Reorientation. And it's also available through Spotify, iTunes, and we're on YouTube as well.
All right. Anything I missed? Anything you want to add?
No, we'll have to have you on the show sometime to talk about the things that you're up to.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.